We're taking our rightful share of your dad's inheritance. Get out of the house." Diane's voice crackled through the phone, laced with triumph. I took a slow breath, keeping my tone steady. "Talk to my lawyer," I said, then ended the call. "My name is Sophie Palmer. I'm a 34-year-old financial consultant in Chicago, and 3 weeks ago, I lost my father to cancer. Along with grief, his passing left me with another burden, my stepmother, Diane. She and my father were married for 5 years, but she spent most of the time trying to push me out of his life. My dad saw through her games, though, and in the months before he died, he made sure she wouldn't get away with what she was planning. Diane thought she could bully me out of my inheritance. She had no idea what was coming. The plan my father left behind. As my father's illness progressed, we had long, careful discussions about his estate. He noticed how Diane became more controlling, intercepting my calls, limiting my visits, even trying to isolate him from friends. "Sophie," he told me one evening in his office, his voice weaker but his mind sharp, "I know exactly who she is. I won't let her take what belongs to you." With the help of his lawyer, my father put ironclad plans in place. The family home when I grew up in was already in my name. His assets were locked into trusts she couldn't touch. He even recorded video statements detailing his decisions, anticipating the fight that was bound to come. And now, it was here. I sipped my wine, staring at my phone. Diane thought she'd won. In reality, she had just walked into a trap my father set months ago. Diane's true colors. Growing up, my father was my rock. After my mother passed away from breast cancer when I was 12, it was just the two of us. He taught me everything: business, finance, perseverance. No matter how busy he was, he always made time for me. Then Diane arrived. She was a receptionist at one of his properties, and within 6 months, they were married. I was 29 at the time and living my own life, but even from a distance, I saw how quickly she tried to take control. At first, it was subtle, insisting he was too tired for our weekly dinners, making excuses when I called. Then it escalated. She erased all traces of my mother from the house, burned through my father's money like it was hers, and isolated him from anyone who questioned her. But my father was no fool. 2 years ago, when his health declined, he started noticing the red flags. One night, he caught Diane rifling through his financial documents. She began asking too many questions about his will. That's when he took action. "I married her because I was lonely," he admitted to me during chemo, "but I won't let her destroy my legacy. That's you, Sophie. Everything I built is for you." The battle begins. The morning after Diane's call, I met with Richard, my father's longtime lawyer. His expression was grim but determined. "Diane's lawyer reached out last night," he said. "She's contesting the will, claiming your father wasn't of sound mind when he changed it." I exhaled sharply. "She's really trying this, huh?" Richard nodded. "What she doesn't know is that we have everything on video. Every meeting, every statement. Your father was meticulous, and we also have his doctor's reports confirming he was completely lucid." I almost laughed. Diane had no idea she was walking into a fight she had already lost. "They're pushing for an emergency hearing," Richard continued. "Diane claims she needs immediate access to his accounts for household expenses." I smirked. "The bills are already in my name." Diane had spent years trying to control my father. In his final months, she did everything she could to isolate him. She thought she could erase me from his life. But she underestimated him. She underestimated us. The final move. That night, I couldn't sleep. Memories of my father flooded my mind as wisdom. His warmth, his relentless determination to protect me. Diane thought she could rewrite history, but my father had left behind a story she couldn't erase. Tomorrow morning, we'd walk into that courtroom, and she'd realize the truth. She never had the upper hand. She never even stood a chance. I pulled out the last birthday card my father ever gave me, running my fingers over his handwriting as I read his words again. "Sometimes, Sophie, the best revenge is letting people trip over their own greed." Tomorrow, Diane would learn exactly what that meant. As I prepared the documents for the hearing, a mix of sadness and determination settled over me. This wasn't just about the inheritance anymore. It was about honoring my father's final wishes and standing up to the woman who had tried to erase me from his life. The showdown. The morning of the hearing arrived with a heavy tension in the air. At the courthouse, Diane sat across the aisle with her lawyer, draped in an expensive black dress, her lips curled into a confident smirk. She had even brought her adult children, no doubt hoping to paint herself as the grieving widow, surrounded by a devoted family. I caught their glances, the whispered exchanges as they sized me up, certain they were about to walk away victorious. "Don't let them rattle you," Richard murmured beside me. "Everything's in order. Just let the evidence do its job." Diane's lawyer started strong, spinning the narrative we had anticipated. According to him, I was a manipulative daughter who had taken advantage of my father's illness, while Diane was the devoted wife who had sacrificed everything to care for him. He even had the audacity to suggest my father's mental state had been compromised by his medications. "Your Honor," he declared, his voice heavy with feigned sincerity, "Mrs. Palmer simply wishes to maintain the lifestyle her husband wanted for her to protect the home they built together." I felt my fists clench at the word "together." Diane had spent 5 years siphoning my father's wealth, isolating him from the people who truly cared. She had contributed nothing to the business he built from the ground up, nothing to the home that had been mine long before she ever stepped foot in it. Richard remained calm as he arose to present our case. "Your Honor, we have not only the legal documentation of Mr. Palmer's wishes but also video evidence of him explicitly stating his decisions and the reasoning behind them." Silence fell over the courtroom as my father's face flickered onto the screen. He looked frail, his illness evident, but his eyes were sharp and unwavering. "I'm making these changes to my will of sound mind and body. My daughter, Sophie, is the rightful heir to my estate. My current wife, Diane, has been provided for adequately through our prenuptial agreement, but she will not inherit my business or family home. These belong to my daughter." I watched as Diane's smug expression slowly dissolved. Her face paled, her fingers tightening around the arms of her chair. Her lawyer shifted, clearly uneasy as more evidence was presented. A meticulous paper trail of my father's estate planning, medical evaluations confirming his mental clarity, and documented conversations detailing his intentions. Then came the real blow. Surveillance footage from my father's home office appeared on the screen, showing Diane rummaging through his files in the dead of night. Next, bank statements revealed in the unauthorized transfers she had attempted in the final weeks before his passing. Richard turned back to the judge. "Furthermore, Your Honor, we have evidence that Mrs. Palmer attempted to transfer significant sums from Mr. Palmer's business accounts to her own, without authorization, mere days before his passing." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Diane's face went from pale to crimson. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering urgently, but she ignored him, suddenly standing. "He promised me everything," she shrieked, her carefully crafted composure crumbling. "Sophie turned him against me. I deserve that house. I was his wife." "Mrs. Palmer, please sit down," the judge ordered, his patience wearing thin. "Your outburst is not helping your case." I stayed silent, watching her unravel. Her children, who had looked so self-assured at the start, now sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact. The courtroom buzzed with hushed conversations as Diane muttered angrily under her breath. Then came the final nail in the coffin. A second video played, recorded just 2 weeks before my father's death. His voice was weaker, but his words were firm. "I regret the mistakes I made. I see Diane's true intentions now. My daughter has always been my real partner in this life, and everything I have built belongs to her." Diane slumped in her chair, defeated. "Order in the court," the judge demanded, slamming his gavel. Then, he turned to deliver his ruling. "Justice served. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, I find no grounds to contest Mr. Palmer's will. His final wishes will be upheld in full." A slow exhale left my lips. I had known we would win, but hearing it spoken aloud felt like the weight of the last 3 weeks finally lifted from my shoulders. The judge wasn't finished. His gaze settled on Diane. "Furthermore," he said sharply, "any attempt to appeal this ruling will result in a thorough investigation into the suspicious financial activities uncovered today. Do I make myself clear? Diane stiffened. Her lawyer hurriedly gathered his papers, clearly eager to be anywhere but here. But the most satisfying moment came next. The court also orders a full audit of all financial transactions made by Mrs. Palmer during her marriage to the deceased. The judge continued, given the evidence of unauthorized transfers, this matter will be referred to the appropriate authorities for further investigation. Diane's face drained of color entirely. Her children, who had stood proudly by her side this morning, now hurriedly slipped out of the courtroom, wanting no part in her downfall. Her web of lies had collapsed. The truth had finally won. The final goodbye. As we left the courthouse, Richard handed me a sealed envelope. "Your father asked me to give you this after the hearing," he said softly. Inside, I found a letter and an old photograph of me father and me, standing in front of the first real estate project we had worked on together. "My dearest Sophie," the letter began, "if you're reading this, then everything has gone according to plan. I knew Diane would show her true colors. While I regret bringing her into our lives, I never doubted your strength. The business is yours now. Everything we built together, it was always meant for you." Tears welled in my eyes, but they weren't from sadness. They were from the knowledge that, even in death, my father had protected me. At evening, I walked through my father's study, me steady now running my fingers along the desk he had Saturday at for so many years. In the corner, Diane's designer handbag, still Saturday, where she had left it. She would have to return to collect her belongings soon. But that would be her final visit to the house that had never truly been hers. And after that, she'd be nothing more than a footnote in a story she had no right to be part of. I found myself surrounded by 30 years of business records, family photos, and personal memento search piece, a testament to the life my father had built. It was in this very space that he first taught me about real estate, showing me property assessments and explaining market trends when I was barely old enough to understand. I had always been his true partner in this business, and now it was mine to carry forward. Diane had scheduled a time to collect her things, supervised by our lawyers. As I prepared for her final visit, I discovered something that made my heart race. A hidden compartment in my father's desk. Inside was a journal, one I had never seen before. It was detailed, documenting everything: Diane's manipulation attempts, the secret phone calls, the late-night snooping through his files. My father had known exactly who she was, but he had played along, protecting what mattered most. The investigation into Diane's financial activities had uncovered more than we had anticipated. She had attempted to transfer nearly $300,000 from my father's accounts in his final weeks. A detective had uncovered a troubling pattern in her past relationships. Diane had a history of targeting wealthy older men, but none had been as prepared as my father. His foresight had saved him from her grasp. I threw myself into running the business, determined to honor my father's legacy. The employees welcomed me with open arms, many of them having known me since childhood, having seen me by my father's side as he groomed me for leadership. They shared stories of how he had proudly shown them photos of my college graduation, my first real estate deal, my early successes. One evening, while reviewing some old contracts, I received an unexpected call from Thomas, one of Diane's children. "Sophie," he said hesitantly, I wanted to apologize. We knew what our mother was doing, but we didn't stop her. Your father was a good man who deserved better." His words took me by surprise, but they brought a deep sense of validation. Even Diane's own children had seen through her act. Thomas explained that she'd pulled similar schemes before, but my father had outsmarted her completely. Under my leadership, the business thrived. I began adding my own touches to the legacy my father had built, introducing a scholarship program for aspiring real estate professionals, naming it after him. The first recipient was a young woman whose father had sacrificed everything to support her education. It felt like coming full circle. The day Diane came to collect her belongings was tense. She arrived with two movers and her lawyer, looking less polished than during the hearing. As she walked through the house, I noticed how she lingered in front of certain items, the expensive decorations she had convinced my father to buy. You can take what you personally purchased, Richard reminded her firmly. Everything else stays. He had a detailed inventory of what belonged to the estate. Diane's face tightened as she realized how little she could actually claim. I maintained my distance, working in my father's study while they packed. Through the open door, I could hear her muttering about family heirlooms, though none of them were hers. Richard stopped her several times from trying to take items that belonged to my mother or had been in our family for generations. The most satisfying moment came when she tried to claim an antique grandfather clock, insisting my father had promised it to her. Richard calmly pulled out a photograph from 30 years ago, showing the clock in our living room when I was a child long before Diane had ever entered our lives. "Mrs. Palmer," he said, his tone unwavering, "please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." The clock stayed, along with the numerous other items she tried to claim. As she prepared to leave, Diane paused in the foyer. For a moment, I thought she might try to apologize or make amends. Instead, she spoke bitterly. "You think you've won, but you'll end up alone, just like your father did." I stepped out of the study, facing her directly. "My father was never alone," I replied calmly. "He had met his true family by his side until the end. That's something you never understood and never will." She left without another word. As the door clicked shut behind her, a sense of profound closure washed over me. The house seemed lighter, as if her departure had lifted a heavy shadow. I walked through each room, touching the familiar surfaces, feeling truly at home for the first time since my father's passing. 1 year later, a Saturday in my father's mini office, reviewing our latest property acquisition. The business had grown significantly under my leadership, expanding into new markets, while maintaining the integrity my father had instilled. His photo Saturday on my desk, a constant reminder of everything he had taught me. The investigation into Diane's financial activities had concluded, revealing a pattern of fraud that stretched back years before she met my father. She faced legal consequences for her attempts to steal from his accounts during his final days. Last I heard, she had moved to another state, her carefully crafted image of the grieving widow shattered beyond repair. The house felt like home again. I had preserved the elements that held family memories. My mother's paintings hung once more in the living room, and I had updated other areas to reflect my own style. The grandfather clock still marked the passage of time in the foyer, its chimes a familiar comfort. Most importantly, I had honored my father's legacy by simply keeping what was rightfully mine, but by building upon it. The scholarship program had already helped 3 promising students pursue their dreams in real estate development. Sometimes, healing comes in unexpected forms. For me, it came through the respect and love I saw in our employees' eyes whenever they mentioned my father. They shared stories of his kindness, his business integrity, and how proud he had been of me. These moments helped me realize that his legacy wasn't just in the properties or bank accounts, it was in the lives he touched and the values he instilled. Last week, I found an old photo album in his study, one I hadn't noticed before. Inside was a letter, dated just days before his death. "Sophie, you were always stronger than you knew. Remember that success isn't just about building wealth, it's about maintaining your integrity while doing so. You've made me proud in ways I never could have imagined." The real victory wasn't just keeping what was rightfully mine, it was honoring my father's legacy by living up to the values he taught me. The business continued to thrive, but more importantly, it did so with the same principles of honesty and integrity that my father always championed. Diane's attempts to take what wasn't hers ultimately revealed the strength I inherited from my father. Sometimes, the best revenge isn't about winning in court, it's about proving that goodness and truth eventually prevail.